In this tutorial, I am going to cover the basic setup for creating grabbable objects in your VR scene. There's two main steps to doing this. We're going to add a direct interactor to our left and right controller, and then we're going to create some 3D objects and add an XR grab interactable to them. And then at the end of the tutorial, we'll also mess with a few settings to try and improve the performance. So let's go ahead and just dive right in. And if you recall from our last tutorial on teleportation, we had grabbed a prefab from our sample XR toolkit, and we can do the same thing with the direct interactor grabbable setup. So if you come over to our XR toolkit and come down to interactors, you should find a direct interactor along with a bunch of others. Let's go ahead and grab that and drag that onto our left controller and also onto our right controller. And when we do that, what you'll notice is it adds this XR direct interactor script, but it also adds a sphere collider. And it does that for both the right and the left. And if we click on our XR origin, we can see that the collider that it adds is really, really large. It's about the size of our character in terms of its radius. And so what we want to do is we want to click on the two direct interactors that we just added. We want to modify their radius to make it a little smaller, something more hand-sized. So let's go ahead and set this to 0.05 instead of 0.1. And let's go ahead and click back on our XR origin, take a look, and you can see, that looks a little closer to like the size of a fist, right? Not too big, not too small. Again, you can adjust this collider based on your use case. If you have really large objects that are really far apart, having a larger collider is probably not a big deal. If you have a lot of small objects that are really close together, you're going to want to have a collider that's a little bit more precise. So that's part of the reason of wanting to change the collider. The other reason is, hey, hands are not that big, and we want our collider to be as close to the location and size of our hand so that we're not able to grab objects that are like too far beyond where we perceive our hand to be. So that's the other reason we want to do this. All right, so now that we've done that, we're pretty much good to go there. I think really the only thing we want to do is do a quick check on some of the settings here. I'm not seeing anything in particular that we need to change. All of this looks pretty good. The only thing I'll point out is that it does already have some haptic feedback set up. So notionally, when you're interacting with the objects we're about to create, it will vibrate, which is kind of nice. It lets you kind of know that something is interactable and that you've successfully grabbed it. But you can also see that there are some settings here for adding in like audio feedback. And then there are some things that we can do for interaction events to cause, like, say, an object to change its color. As just another way of creating that sort of feedback to let the user know that something is or isn't grabbable. So we can maybe play with that at the end of the tutorial if there's time. All right, so let's go ahead and jump on to the next step, and let's create some objects that we can actually grab. So let's go ahead and right click in our hierarchy, and let's just add a couple cubes here. So let's start there. And this is way too big for what I want to do, so I'm going to set this to 0.1, 0.1, and 0.1. So that's a little more reasonable size. And then I'm going to drag it over here to this, this conveyor that I have set up. What you'll want to do in your scene, if you don't have a table-like surface or something that's about waist to chest high in your game environment, go ahead and just create like a box that's big enough for you to set these cubes on, just so that you're not having to bend down to the floor to try and pick these things up. All right, so now that we've got that cube created, let's go ahead and rename it. We'll go ahead and call this cube Instantaneous. Instantaneous. And you'll see here in a second why we're calling it that. I'll go into Add Component and type XR Grab. We're going to hit this Grab Interactable. And what it does is it adds a rigid body, which tells our system, hey, this object should behave based on physics. And you can see it's got gravity and mass and some different settings. And then you can see it adds this XR Grab Interactable script. And there's a bunch of different settings in here. For the most part, we can leave them alone. What we will be talking about is this movement type. There are 3 different options. So I'm going to show you each of the options, and we'll talk a little bit about the differences between them and why you would go with one over another. So let's go ahead and start with instantaneous, and then just for fun, let's go ahead and add a material to that cube just so it stands out a bit. So let's go ahead and add this red color to it, and then we'll go ahead and we'll test this out and see if it works. And then we'll maybe play around with the other settings. All right, so I'm gonna go ahead and put my headset on here, and I'm gonna grab my controllers, and then let's give this a real quick test. All right, so let's go ahead and warp on over to where I placed that cube, and we'll walk over. And when I put my hand near it, it vibrates the controller. So I get a little pulse every time I bring my hand close, whether it's my left or my right. And that just kind of tells me that, hey, this thing is interactable in some way. So now I'm going to reach over and I'm going to hit the grip button, and you can see that what it's doing is it snaps it essentially to the position of my thumb. So I can drop that back down, and when I grab it, no matter where I grab it, it kind of always snaps to that same position on my thumb, right? Now you can see I can push it, pull it, rotate it, I can kind of toss it. So it's behaving based on physics, and it's interacting with the world around it based on physics. But what's interesting is when I'm grabbing it, because I have the movement type set to instantaneous, it's just placing the position of the cube and orientation of the cube. Every frame updates. The game updates every time step, and it just tells it put the cube at the position that the controller is at. So if I put the controller inside the conveyor here, it's going to put the cube there. And that's not very realistic. So we don't want to use the instantaneous setting in most cases because of that. So let's go ahead and back out. And then let's try the other settings here. So let's go ahead and duplicate this cube so we can kind of play around and see those differences. Let's go ahead and rename this one. And let's rename this one kinematic. All right. And let's give it a different color. Let's make this one, let's drag it over here, and then let's make this one kind of this blue color. And then on the movement type, let's switch it to kinematic. And let's go ahead and duplicate this one more time. And let's rename it to cube velocity. All right. And let's update its movement type to velocity. And then let's reposition it here. And let's make it kind of the seafoam green color. And let's give that a real quick test just to kind of see what the differences are between those three. All right. All right, so again, the instantaneous, it's just moving the position of the cube relative to my controller, not really calculating any physics when I'm moving it. It'll still give some physics with the rigid body with the other cubes, but you can see it doesn't really behave in a kind of normal way. I can kind of push into stuff if I go slow enough, and it'll move right through. So we don't want that. Our kinematic clearly has some physics going on, but you can again see that it's the way it's calculating the physics is it's really not prioritizing that physics interaction, and so I'm not really getting the exact behavior that I want out of that. All right, I'm going to attempt to pick this up off the ground. It's kind of a pain. All right, cool, got it. All right, let's go back over to our cubes here. And now what you can see is I've got this one set to velocity, right? And so when I go to move, now you can see it's actually colliding with the conveyor, and it's colliding with the other physics objects that I have in my scene. So this is fundamentally what we're looking for. We want to be able to have it behave in a physical way. And you can see that if I just kind of tap it, I get kind of a normal movement. If I hit it really hard, I get a much more physics accurate sort of depiction of what's going on. All right, so now that we have those set up, we've got the basics down, let's go ahead and play around with the settings and see if we can improve this a little bit. All right, so we've got our cube instantaneous. We know we're probably not really going to use that, but let's go ahead and update the rigid body to say collision detection. Let's set that to continuous. This will help improve that performance just a little bit, especially when it's colliding with these other interactables. It should maybe intersect a little little less, but it'll still pass through them, so I won't expect too much out of it. Let's do the same thing on the kinematic. Let's go ahead and set it to continuous as well. And again, really the only difference between kinematic and instantaneous is sort of like the priority that it's going into in terms of the calculation of the physics. And then let's do the same thing on the velocity. Let's set its collision to continuous, and that should get us a little more accurate response. And then the other thing that we can do is we can go into our project settings. So let's go into our settings, and let's actually change the let's change the physics calculation time step, right? So think about the game as a simulation, right? Where each time step, the game is updating information in the world. And we could probably increase or decrease the time step so that it's making those calculations a little more frequently. So let's go ahead and set this to 0.0111111111, which if you're good at math, you'll realize is about 90 frames per second. And so if you just do 1 divided by 90, that's kind of what you'll get there. And so that's a pretty good improvement. So it's calculating the physics about twice as often now. So that should help a little bit. And then the other thing we can do is we can come over to this physics tab here. And what you'll see is that there are some additional settings. Like this is something like where you can adjust things like gravity, for example. So if you were doing a simulation or a game that's on a different planet, you could come in here and change the gravity. I'm not going to do that right now, but just kind of pointing that out. And then the other thing we want to do here is we want to look at this default solver iterations. Right now it's set to 6. Let's go ahead and set that to let's set it to like 12. That's probably a good enough number. That'll increase the precision of our physics a bit. And then the other thing we can do is we can update this solver type to, instead of a projected Gauss-Seidel, we can do a temporal. So this will take time into consideration. And hopefully what that'll do is improve the collisions and the physics of all of the objects, but in particular our velocity cube should improve quite substantially. So like when we were originally using the velocity cube, there was still a little bit of that intersection problem that we were seeing from the other objects. Now that we have the physics updating a little more frequently, hopefully we'll see a bit better performance out of everything. So again, looks like I'm getting some good. Oh yeah, like you can already tell that that is behaving a lot better, right? So I'm not getting the same sort of intersection that I got from the instantaneous, so that's good. And then, but you can still see the kinematic and the instantaneous they still pass through things a bit. But again, you can see that I'm getting a little bit better behavior out of those cubes. And then you can see now when I hit the edge of the cube against the conveyor belt, there's really almost no intersection. Same thing on the intersection or the interaction between the cubes that are interactable, right? So I'm not getting really any intersection artifacts. So the physics now is much, 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 much better. All right, so that's one improvement. And then there's one last improvement we can make, right? So when we look at the way the object is connecting to the hand, it's not quite um, accurate as we would want. And one way we can fix that is to ask the system to attach the object based um, on where the hand model is relative to the object when you hit the grab button. We can do that by using this dynamic attach feature. So I'm going to attach that. And you can see there's some different settings in terms of position, rotation, and then like collider volume and things like that. So let's go ahead and do that for all three. And the other option we would technically have is to use this attach transform. So let's go ahead and let's do that as well. All right, so we'll keep kinematic and velocity. using this dynamic attach, but let's on the instantaneous. Let's go ahead and add empty game object, and let's call it attach. Can't type today. Attach offset. And then on the attach offset, let's go ahead and just sort of move it a little bit um, over and down. You can pick whatever position you want, really doesn't matter. And then we're going to go over here and let's just drag this attach offset onto our attach transform. So now instead of the cube snapping to our thumb, it should attach, a little bit off of the hand. So let's go ahead and hit play. Teleport back over. And okay, so now I'm going to grab the cube like right here. And for some reason, I'm not getting that behavior. Maybe I accidentally turned that off. All right, it's working on the kinematic one. So you can see here, like if I'm kind of like toward the edge here, I get that. If I put my hand more in, I'm now here. And it's kind of matching, relative to where I grab at. So this is, I guess, without it. All right. And then now this is the attached transform. Now it looks like maybe I left that on there. So let's go back into our settings real quick and just double check that I got all that right. All right, so let's come over here to our velocity cube. And yep, somehow I managed to turn that off. So we want the dynamic attach on our velocity cube. We want our kinematic cube, the blue one, to also have the dynamic attach. And then on the instantaneous one, let's turn the dynamic attach off because that was overriding our attach offset. And now it should use that attach offset to position the cube relative to our hand rather than the default position. All right, let's try this again. All right, cool. Now that's working. All right, do the same thing here. Yep, that's working. And now you can see, because I put that attached transform, that it's not kind of in the same position. Now, this is sort of a tricky thing to kind of get right, and you'll have to kind of iterate over, a couple of different trial and error. But again, you can kind of get a sense of, where it should attach. So I moved it, relatively down and away. And so, yeah, you can see now, no matter where I grab it, it always kind of shoots up there. So play around with that, see how you can do it, particularly if you're using an object that is, got like a handle or something like that. That attached transform is kind of useful. And there is a way to kind of do it when you're in game and seeing it, but it's a little tricky, and sometimes you need a second person to kind of get it right. But when you hit play on the game and you are in the headset, right? You can still actually manipulate the settings of the object, right? So let me see if I can do this at the same time here. So I'm gonna get a little closer just so that I'm not having to like go crazy reaching for this thing. So now that I have the cube, right? Oh, did I lose it? Yeah, it fell on the ground. All right, so let's go down here. All right, got my cube. And the way I like to do this, and it doesn't always work because again, this is something that if you have two people, it seems to work a lot better. All right, I think I dropped the cube again. All right, all right, all right. Let's see if we can do this. All right, so kind of have it set up on my lap, and I've got the cube in my hand, and I don't have the headset on. I have it in my lap. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take that, I'm going to click on the attach offset, and I'm going to move it to like 0, 0. And then sometimes it'll let you just drag it directly. So you can kind of see it in the scene here. And, notionally I can drag that. Let's try it this way. For some reason it's not letting me do the update that way. I know in the past it used to let me do that, but maybe they fixed that bug. So yeah, essentially you'll just have to go in and do some trial and error until you get the position just right. And that can be a little annoying, but for the most part you should be able to reasonably get it. So all right, that's basics of grab interactables in a nutshell. We'll cover some more advanced topics on grabbing and like adapting the animation of the hands and the position of the hands relative to the objects that you're grabbing, and probably two-handed grabbing as well. So we'll do that in a separate tutorial. But for now, this gets you kind of partway there, and we'll work on the more advanced stuff in a later tutorial. All right, if you have any questions, let me know. Thanks.